One of the most important components to a good, successful time in the Hyrox competition is being able to sled push well. It's where many athletes will lose rhythm, momentum, and ultimately cost them more time. So regardless of what category you compete in, you best be strong enough to push the sled, endure the pain, and get it fucking done. So here in this video, we'll have a deep dive into the biomechanics of the sled push, from everything on how you should set up to the direction of force application for you to go forward and maintain some speed, stride length, stride frequency, a few arm position options, and one or two that we are seeing done more in the games. We'll finish off with how you can train to improve your sled push. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first up, let's discuss the fundamentals and those basics. No matter what technique and position you choose to use in your training and your competition, the fundamentals must always stay the same. The fundamentals and the basics will get you very, very far. When you are feeling tired, fatigued, weaker, the brain will shut down its basic coordination and motor skills in order to preserve energy. And what that means for you is you're going to get sloppy. So it's why you have to place so much emphasis in your training and lead up to the competition on the basics and the fundamentals. If they are ingrained in your training and your brain, when it comes to a fatigued state, you're going to be more likely to do your competition sled well. So yeah, let's get straight into the fundamentals. Number one, it's all about posture. Posture and how you set up your positioning. So we want to make sure we can produce force from the legs into the ground, and in order for us to transfer that force up through the legs and into the sled, the torso, the trunk is in the way. So we have to make sure that our torso isn't creating any energy leaks and dissipating any of that force, power, and speed transfer. So this is why your postural positioning is critical. So just like you would when you squat, you deadlift, you chin up, you overhead press, we want to essentially create this neutral spine position, which is not overly flexed and it's not overly extended. We want to draw the shoulders back and down and create stiffness in the shoulder region. We then want to tighten up the lats because that will help stabilize the spine further. And then we need to control the hips, and we do that by bracing our abdominals and core musculature. Number two, we're going to move on to the lower body, the legs, and the direction of force application. In order for us to get that sled moving forward and at decent pace, we have to apply what's called horizontal ground reaction force. So what's actually happening is that we are applying force into the ground through the legs. That ground pushes back up against our legs, and then we can transfer that force through the legs, through the core, through the trunk, into the arms and into the sled. We get movement forward. So first of all, we have to get the sled moving from a dead stop, which means there are three things we have to consider. First of all, we have to overcome the load and the weight of the sled. And secondly, we have to overcome inertia, which is the gravity acting down. And then we also have to think about friction between the sled and the turf. So to start that sled push, two legs are going to be easier than one. So I highly recommend to get into this start position. Number one, make sure that your posture is nice and tight. And then we have a slight bend on the knees. You then have to drive both feet into the ground, create some movement, and then you can begin your standard alternating stride. So when it comes to the direction of force application into the ground that's going to help you the most, this one will make a lot of sense to most of you intuitively. We actually just do it. But if you understand the details, I think it will really help you when you're in sticky situations, you're tired, fatigued. Just think about the positions that you have to actually apply the direction of force, and it will really help you maintain some momentum and an understanding of your body angles and positions. So I mentioned earlier that we need to produce horizontal forces in order for us to travel horizontally with the sled. However, we must also produce a fair amount of vertical force. So that means we have to push in this diagonal direction. Now, things like arm placement, torso position will dictate the amount of vertical and horizontal forces that you need to apply. Stay tuned, we'll talk about the arms a little bit later. Next up, we're going to talk about stride length and stride frequency. Stride length refers to the distance between the front working leg and the rear leg, whereas stride frequency refers to the amount of turnovers that we apply. So both your stride length and your stride frequency must be consistent, because pushing the sled is all about rhythm and momentum, and you know that if you stop and have to start again, it's going to cost you a lot of time and energy. So when we think about stride length, we always want to make sure that front leg is in what's known as a triple flexed position. So if we look at the ankle, the knee, and the hip, It's in this triple flex position. Once it applies force into the ground and comes behind the body, it's now finished in this triple extended position. This is going to give you the best opportunity to produce force and power. What will dictate your stride length is your level of strength through the trunk and core, your level of strength in the legs and hips, and also your level of mobility. I can't stress that mobility enough. If you are tight in the glutes, for example, and you're trying to bring that leg forward into the correct position, you ain't gonna be able to get that leg forward. And if you are tight through the hips and the quads, you're not gonna be able to fully extend your leg behind to complete the stride length that's going to optimize your strength and power. If your stride length is shorter, you may compensate through the ankles by turning the feet more. You may compensate through rounding the lower back, which isn't any good for your lower back and your joints and overall force production. So you want to make sure that in your preparation, you ain't just working on fitness, conditioning, strength, power, you're also working on becoming nice and mobile and strong in those mobile positions. So when it comes to stride frequency, this all depends on your level of strength and conditioning. So if you are a strong athlete compared to an endurance-based athlete, you may want to take longer, slower strides because you can overcome that weight at a slower rate. That's going to help preserve energy. Whereas if you are on the weaker side, you may want to move faster so that you can create more momentum and rhythm and use that to help you get through. Next up, let's talk about arm positions. I highly recommend you use this arm position. Bend elbows, lats nice and tight, thoracic slightly extended, lats locked in. Remember, the lat attaches from up where the shoulder is down into the lower back. It's going to contribute a ton to stabilizing the spine and helping you stay stiff, rigid, but also dynamic enough to produce force from the ground up through the body into the sled. By bending your arms, you also put all your back musculature and lats into their mechanically strongest position. The other option you can use, but I really don't recommend it, is straight arms. Straight arms are harder simply because it's just harder to stay tight in your trunk and core. It's more of a skillful practice having to stay tight. It's just not an advantageous position to work with when you're tired and feeling fucked. And because your arms are straight, your torso, your lower back, it's more at risk from creating poor angles and, dissipating more energy and force and power. I recommend bent arms, get tight, brace, and go. Lastly, we're going to look at the arm position that is becoming a lot more popular now in the Hyrox games, and that is this sort of hook grip, bent arm, elbow locked in position. This simply works because your center of mass is even closer to the center of mass of the sled. Your shoulders are a little bit more forward. You may even be a little bit lower to the sled. It's going to allow you to create better angles to drive the legs down. You're essentially shortening the moment arm with the angles that are created by the torso and legs. So yes, it's a mechanical advantageous position, especially for those larger, broader, taller athletes. If anyone is on the smaller side, females, smaller males, then you're probably best off sticking to this bent arm position. That is probably the best position to use. So last up, let's talk about how you can train to have a very good sled push. Now in sports science, there's a term we use called dynamic correspondence. Dynamic correspondence is a set of principles that states when we do an exercise, it has to have transfer to our sport. And in this case, the Hyrox, the sled push. So are we choosing exercises that have transfer to the sled push? To choose the exercises that have transfer, we have to abide by those set principles. And one of those principles is the direction of movement. So stay with me here. Think about the direction of movement. We also have another term in sports science called coordinate systems. Now there are two coordinate systems. We have the global coordinate system, which is the world, and we have the local coordinate system, which is you, me, the athlete. If we look at pushing the sled in relation to the global coordinate system, we can see that we are moving horizontally. However, if we consider the local coordinate system, the actual athlete, we can see that if we spin that athlete vertically, the athlete is actually pushing in this vertical direction. So when we choose our exercises, we do have to choose exercises that mimic those directions of movement. In this case, movements that allow us to build vertical force production, the squats, the deadlift, the front squats, the Olympic lifting variations. So it's not just using the sled to improve the sled. We can use basic movement patterns like those exercises I just mentioned in order to have a transfer to having a good, strong sled push. Another little principle from dynamic correspondence is all about angles, right? We have to learn how to produce force from specific angles that are in our sport, and in this case again, yes, the sled push. So one of my favorite exercises is the barbell front rack step up. And if we can set the box or the bench to a height that mimics the same angles of our front leg that does work on the sled, this is going to have a huge specific transfer to good quality effective sled pushes going forward. So if you are going to train the sled, maybe how about you have 2 days? One day where you work on a squatting based movement, front squat, back squat, even deadlift or Olympic lifting variation. And in day 2, you could work on front rack step ups or safety bar step ups and these type of movements. If you decide to have sled pushes in your workout twice a week, you could try loading up really heavy and pushing that sled really slow. And then day 2, you can lighten the load and focus more on speed. So you're getting 2 components of sled pushing: heavy, slow contractions and light, fast contractions. You're developing lots of maximal strength on the sled and you're developing lots of speed and power on the sled. And obviously as you approach competition, as you get fitter, you can combine the 2 and get into that lactate system as well. That's gonna just basically fuck your legs up. So there's a few ideas on some of the fundamentals to sled pushing. I hope you liked this video. I hope it was beneficial. Give it a thumbs up if you did, share it, comment, let me know what you guys think. Please subscribe to my channel, help it grow, and check out some of my other videos, see what you think. Cheers guys.